All right, let's dig in. In this section of the video, we're going to look at measures 1 through 8 of Etude number 11 in D minor and talk about all the little details that will help you to practice and improve your performance for the all-region auditions. That was measures 1 through 8 of Etude number 11, played at 80 beats a minute, which is a good performance tempo that's not too slow. Let's look carefully at measures 1 through 8 with some detail. You'll notice I've got a lot of marks on the page. I would encourage you to focus for at least 1 week just on those 8 measures, and I'll talk you through some of the pitfalls and problem areas for these 8 measures. Before we dig into the details, let's review the vocabulary. That's the D minor scale. Starts on D, ends on D, and has 1 flat. First, let's play it slurred. Now let's play it tongued. Our next step is to check the counting. So before we do the counting, wet your reed, make sure it doesn't dry out. I'm going to turn the metronome on 80, and we're going to count through the first 8 measures together. 6 beats in a bar, 8th note gets the beat. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready. 1, 3, 4, 6, 1, 4, 5, 6, 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, and 3, and 4, and 6, and 1, 3, 4, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 5, and 6, and 1, pullet, triplet, 4. Now let's look at the phrasing that's marked in the music. You'll notice there's a breath mark in measure 2. You really won't have time for a breath. Most of you, once you get into learning this etude, you'll find that that's really just a little bit of a break, a lift, as they say in Texas. Your first real breath will come after the first note of measure 5. So even though that's a quarter note that gets 2 counts, all of us will be playing it 1 full count and taking 1 count to breathe. Finally, let's look at measure 7. That's a 16th rest, and it's really tempting to take a breath there. Don't do it. You're not going to have time for it. Instead, just take a very deep breath at measure 5 and have a half count of rest at measure 7. You won't have time for a breath. Just let the silence be there. Now let's look at some of the small details to learning the technique for this section of the etude. First, measures 1 and 2. And you'll notice right off the bat, as they say, there's 2 difficult intervals played get one after the other, D and A. You think about it, it's not any big deal. It's just 2 notes, D and A. But it's half whole note slurring down. See, there's a little bit of break in the sound. What happened was I had my finger all the way down on the half hole, and then there was a lack of coordination moving to off the half hole and putting my other fingers down. Here's a trick. Keep your finger way down at the bottom of the half hole plate. Move it very close to the half hole opening. See? Clean slur. So that will help you in measures 1 and 2. Now let's look at measures 2 through 5. Measure 3 is very easy, But let's check out measure 4. It's got a lot of notes in it, but really all it is the following scale. C sharp B A. And if you look closely or zoom in on my video, you'll notice I have C sharp B and A circled with arrows pointing to them, because that's really what's going on. We're just descending a scale and then adding a few notes to it. Then we have a semi-chromatic scale, A sharp, I hate it. Sometimes in my head I think B flat. So A, B flat, B natural, right? C sharp, D. That is the form of the minor scale called melodic, but that's the only time we're going to see it today. So a semi-chromatic scale there. Now let's take a look at measures 5 and 6, starting with the note after the breath. Measure 5 is no big deal, but we've got that octave leap coming up. So what I'd like for you to do before you try the octave leap now is, I want you to find the first finger left-hand key, the B key, and just blow through it to get any spit that might be out of it. If there's even a small amount of spit inside the bore, that octave may not work. You may even want to take a tiny bit of rubbing alcohol on a needle and just gently clean around the well to get any oil or grit that's built up in there from your fingers. When we play the D tongued, there's no big deal. Even if there's a little bit of spit in there, it's usually okay. But when we slur it, that's when those issues come out. So you should be able to slur it with just the regular D fingering. And if you have a good reed and a decent oboe, that D should just sing out like an opera singer going for the high note. Finally, let's take a look at the note in measure 6 that I have a star with an arrow pointing to it. A lot of students overdo the staccato, and it doesn't sound musical if it is played too short, like this. You'll notice that doesn't seem to make sense. The note is isolated and not musical. Instead, just think detached half length. So notice it still has a little bit of length, it's just not purely connected to the other notes around it. And finally, measure 7 and 8. Very, very tough. And if you're wondering, how do I get through that with all those leaps? My secret is this. I play with the inside of my mouth and my air, the A natural at the start of the measure. Because that's the note that's important. The rest of the notes are decorating that A. And then I slur to the others. And keep adding notes one at a time. Finally, let's look at measure 8, the D minor arpeggio. Now, I recommend that you use left F if possible. It's more in tune. No one is telling you how soft to get. I'll talk about that in a later part of this video. But you'll notice it is marked staccato, and it doesn't need to be very short, it just needs to be separated. Left F is the preferred fingering here. If you feel like very awkward for you or uncomfortable or the oboe moves around too much, forked F is a good alternative. An issue that always comes up for oboe players in etudes for all region. Which F to use, the regular one or the left F or the forked F? So let's take a look at the Fs in these 8 measures. Measure 1, that F is going to be regular F. Measure 3, that's going to be regular F. Measure 5, regular F. And finally, measure 8, I just spoke about it. Left F would be preferred, but since it causes the fingers to go back and forth to the front of the instrument, left side, if you want to stay with all fingers in line, the forked F is an alternative that will be very difficult to hear differences at that speed. Bop, bop, beep, bop, bop, ba. So forked F okay, but left F is the preferred. Ferling has given us a number of dynamic changes for this, but as any professional or pre-professional will tell you, not all volume is written in the music. And let's look at a couple of places we should naturally add. First, that measure 1 hairpin, as some older people call it, where you get louder and then get softer. You don't want to do too much of it. You're leaping up to the high F anyway. It's going to sound a little louder. Instead, think of measure 1, the D, and measure 2D, those two Ds being the same volume. Measure 1, measure 2, and then it's kind of an arc, a little bit louder, and then softer back to it again. Now let's look at measure 3. It's a descending line, but we're coming up to a really important chromatic note, C sharp. Let's put a little crescendo in measure 3. A little crescendo. Now, what to do? We've already done a crescendo. We need to go back to where we came from, and remember measure 5 also has a D that we're matching to volume. So at the end of measure 4, put a diminuendo. Therefore, measure 1, measure 2, measure 5. They're all going to match. Finally, let's take a look at measure 7. You'll notice I have in parentheses a forte and an arrow. That reminds me, the volume does not change in measure 7. It's all forte. In fact, it should stay forte until measure 8 downbeat. If we took it and simplified 7 and 8, we would play this. You'll notice all big sound, no peaks and valleys to the volume. I'm really big on goals, and you remember from earlier in this video I mentioned journaling. Start your practice at about 70 beats a minute. That gives you plenty of time to think. So, setting the metronome down to 70. You've got plenty of time to work on the technical aspects. Eventually, you might want to work your way up to 80 or 76. However, keep in mind that judges are instructed. Very, very fast tempos, especially for the slow etude, are not given extra credit, and they probably are penalized. So a little faster is okay. Trying to prove something to other oboe players that you can play it faster and faster is not a good idea for this etude. All right, let's take a look at the arpeggio that's used in these 8 measures. It's the D minor arpeggio, D, A, F, D, and it's descending only. And you notice how I started to practice it. I practice it a little separated, just like the music does. And then slowly over time, speed that up until you're ready to try it in rhythm. 1, pull-let, triple-let, 1. It's a common mistake of students to slow down here. It sounds cool, but it's not written in the music. Trust me, I don't think the judges are going to give you credit for it. You should stay in tempo these first 8 measures. Most of these 8 measures are in legato style. Very little tongue sound should be heard. There's one exception, of course, and that's the measure 8. And then we have one individual note in measure 6 that has some separation. Remember, staccato really means separate. It does not mean short in Italian. So think about legato tongue. Now I know it sounds like to you I just played a bunch of random notes, but if you look back at your music, I played only the notes that were tongued, and think about keeping my face still during the legato. And so I encourage you, except for those 2 little places that have separated notes, keep your face still and keep your airstream moving forward at all times. Now let's talk about how to build up good tone quality. Of course, you've got to have a working instrument and some good reeds. Start with long tones. You'll notice I went from long tones to the first 2 notes of the etude and then back and forth. That's important. Once you get used to playing long tones, you'll slowly and unconsciously realize that everything here is a long tone, and you happen to move the tongues very slightly, and you happen to be moving your fingers. And then finally, we only break the airstream at those few staccato moments. And they're not like tut, 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 tut. That's not a staccato. It's more like ha, 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 a diaphragm movement to help out. Start with long tones, work to legato and slurs, and add staccato later. In fact, it's okay to add staccato much later. Get used to just tonguing legato at first. To work on intonation, make sure, of course, you're working with reeds that are not too old, because once they get old, they will play sharp and be difficult to play high notes and low notes. Work with a tuner, set a tuning standard. D is a good note here. Notice every time I come back to D, I listen for the pitch to make sure I'm matching. And of course, those octave Ds are very, very important. Please resist the urge to pinch to get the high D out. If anything, you should be relaxing inside and just really push the air forward. Good reeds, good habits, keep the face still. And if you are a person who plays sharp in general, open the inside of your mouth as if inside your mouth you're saying, ah. Touch the lips together. Ah inside, touching the lips. You'll instantly play a little bit flatter. At the audition, you will be allowed to play one starting note. Since the first note is D, choose that note. It's a good note to start with anyway. That'll give you an idea about how you're going to begin. Don't let anybody rush you. You don't have to start that very second they say, play one note. Take a deep breath. Play the note. Don't wait too long. And then think about your tempo before you start playing. Remember, journal your progress. It will show you your rate of progress. It will give you an idea about what is difficult for you and what spots you will need to spend more time and less time on. And it will give you a great sense of pride when you look back later after several weeks and months and see how far you have come in your journey to learning the all-region etudes. This is the end of part 1, measures 1 through 8. Don't forget, work with a metronome all the time. At the end of your practice session, then you can try playing it once without the metronome. The metronome conditions you. Good luck, and let's move on now to part 2. The etude number 11 in D minor, if you were to play all of it, is quite taxing. Fortunately, ATSSB has decided to shorten the etude to just 18 measures. So today we're going to be looking at the middle section. So let's hear what that middle section sounds like. Now, even though this etude is billed as being in the key of D minor, strangely enough, this entire middle section is in the key of F major. So let's review the F major scale, slurred and tongued, all the way up to high D. Next, let's take a look at the rhythms and the counting. I'm going to count through it. Now, I'm not going to count a trill, and I'm not going to count the grace notes. So we'll count the basic rhythm together. I'm going to set the metronome at 80 for today. Remember, we're going to ignore grace notes, ignore the trill, the basic counting. And 1, ready, go. 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, trill, 2, 3, 4, 6, 1, 3, 4, 6, 1, and 3 and 4, and 5 and 6 and 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, E and a triplet, 4, 5. More on that in the next screen. Okay, let's take a look at measure 14 now. If you're like me, the first time I saw this, I just said to myself, what? How many beams do they have on those notes? So what I've done to help you is on the screen, I've taken measure 14 and I've written it out twice as slow so it's easier to see the counting. Let's take a look at the counting very slowly. With me. 1, E and a triplet, 1, 2, a 1. So we went on to measure 15 as well. But you'll notice when you write it twice as slow, it doesn't look nearly as difficult. And of course, if Ferling were around, we could ask him, why did you have to write this in 6/8? Why couldn't you write it in 6/4 or 3/4? But 6/8 for very slow music was very common back then. Now, I'm going to play measure 14 and 15 while you look at this simplified counting. Turn on the Met so you can get a tempo reference. And 1 and ready. Let's try that again. 1, E and a triplet, 1, 2. 1, ready. It's still very tough, isn't it? So slow it down, even slow it down where the metronome becomes the 8th note. So that you keep the proportions together. I have occasionally heard oboists at auditions at the region level suddenly slow down on this. That you can't cheat that. It's not a place you can say, well, I can rubato it, or it's an okay place for retard. It's not an okay place to retard. You will need to learn the proportions. Start off by playing it even twice as slow as it appears on the screen. And be very, very careful you're playing the correct rhythms from the beginning. Now let's look at some phrasing and breathing issues with this little section. In the middle of measure 10, there's a breath mark, which we are going to take a deep breath there. So the quarter note on F is going to be played 1 full count, followed by 1 count for a breath, and then the next note. Now, a couple of bars later, there's another breath mark. Here's a place where you're not actually going to breathe. Instead, you'll just put a little bit of a break, or as they say in Texas, a lift. We'll stop the air briefly without taking a breath in. And so that will sound like this. You might be cheating the time very, very slightly, but you won't have time to inhale. Now you look over that note as it's printed in the music on your screen, and you'll see there's a symbol written there, plus C. For some oboes, if you add the low C key, it will add some stability to pitch and tone quality. This varies from instrument to instrument. So if you're taking private lessons, don't try this unless you consult with your teacher first. On occasions, for very soft high C notes, I might add it for stability. Other occasions, I probably will not. So here's an example of this passage with the low C key not added. And you can see it's a little bit sharp. There's some other things you can do to it too, and I'll cover that under the intonation section coming up. Now let's look at some of the tricks for technical passages in this excerpt. We'll start with measure number 10. We've got the trills, and it is certainly the 21st century way to trill very fast, but that's very unstable as far as counting, and it's not definite when you're going to get to the next note. I recommend 2 trills only. That's going to give you 7 notes total. Don't think 7, just think 2 trills. 2 trills. Now let's take a look at how we're going to approach measure number 13 to 14 with the grace notes. I talked about the rhythm earlier in this video, but you'll notice I've got a couple of symbols written in here, and one of them is a capital L written over the F at the beginning of measure 14. That's because you're going to need to play that left F. If you don't have a left F key, you don't have a choice. You'll have to use forked F. But if you do have a left F key, this is the time to use it because the next note is D. So let's take a look at how we're going to approach those grace notes. We're going to play E, regular F, G, left F on the main note. Practice those 4 in a row. Stop the video until you're able to do that and feel confident about it. Now let's do it again, followed by the D. It just doesn't sound the same using forked F. The pitch is a little bit different and it's very awkward on the fingers. Speaking of F, let's go through this excerpt quickly and see if we're using regular F, forked F, or left F. All right, so measure number 9, there's an F, it's regular. Measure number 10, there's an F, it's regular F. Measure number 11, that's regular F2. Now let's skip over to 13. 13 would be regular F on both of the Fs on the top line. And as we mentioned in the previous slide, after the grace notes, you should play left F if you have it, and if you don't have a left F key, you will have to play forked F at the beginning of measure number 14. Also note that I've marked in the music another left F because it's followed by a D, and that's at the end. So we have, and then we have the 6th tuplet, and there's another opportunity for left F. If you have the left F key, use it. All right, let's look at some places to add a few dynamic shadings to give a better sense of phrase to this excerpt. We'll first look at measures 11 and 12. You'll notice a decrescendo is written in there already, but let's continue the decrescendo to the high C. So really the end of the decrescendo is the high C. Now, in measure 12, we have something very odd. We have a crescendo written, but at the beginning of the next measure it says piano. There's only 2 possibilities. One is that the crescendo starts at double piano, which doesn't make sense. Another possibility is that we can crescendo and then go back to piano. And that's the one that I recommend for you, which will sound something like this. Now you'll notice at the end, I backed off the E natural at the very end of measure 12. You could also consider measure 13 as suddenly piano, subito piano, or I put parentheses, S-U-B period piano. Talk to your private teacher about which way he or she prefers that you perform the volume for measures 12 and 13. Now, one of the things I marked in the music that Ferling did not mark was at measure 14, I put a piano reminder to myself because within the context of that little 2-measure phrase, it's still within, as I say, the city limits of piano. And finally, at the end of measure 14, to give the sense of phrase completion, those 2 eighth notes, B natural C, 2 full beats, a little decrescendo there as well. Now let's look at 2 articulation issues in this excerpt. You'll notice in measure 11, that measure has dots and also a slur. That's what's called portato or half staccato. You will play them lengthy but put the slightest break between them. And so let's compare it. Here is legato, measure 11. Now here is measure 11 if they all had just staccato markings, which would be a little weird. And you can see that's really weird. It doesn't make sense to have multiple notes like that unless they're all very, very fast, and they're not here fast at all. So instead we have something in the middle, a half staccato. The second issue occurs at the end of measure 14. We had that terrible technical passage, and then there's one lone staccato note. Don't worry about staccato. You'll be doing very well just to play it tongued. Remember, it's tongued and so is the B natural after it. Get used to playing it very slowly so that you learn the articulation. What you've heard is the result of my practicing over many, many weeks. Don't think that in one day you're going to be able to go from slow to fast. It won't happen. You'll have to be patient. Refer to your journal for your pacing. Now let's mention some activities to build tone and intonation awareness. Since this composition section is in F major, let's focus on F's and C's. So let's start with the F at the top of the staff. The C below it. Practice those with long tones with a tuner. Then go back and compare your octaves. F4, the low F, to F5, the upper F. C5 in the staff to high C, C6. Start with long tones to build confidence. Then use the tuner to compare octaves. If you have a tuner that has a tone generator function, you can even compare octaves and fifths with that as well. Remember, start with long tones before you start thinking about comparing octaves. Journal what measures you've done, and journal your reaction. Was it a good day? Did you get a lot done? Did you get interrupted? Were you focused? Look at your tendencies over time to see the areas that you'll need improvement as well as your areas of strength. Use your journal as a means of looking back as a reward over the hard work you've done to prepare for all region audition. We've come a long way already. Remember, the music that we've worked on today, you should probably spend at least a week on, and then go back and review other things as well. It's okay to look ahead as well, but the bulk of your practice for this etude for this week should be on the measures that we covered. The next video will cover the remainder of the etude, which of course is also very difficult. We're on a long journey together from the summer until the December auditions. I wish you very good luck in your preparation and keep practicing.
Welcome back. This part of the video deals with the concluding portion of Etude number 11, one of the ATSSB All-Region Etudes for 2023. Even though this etude is listed as being in the key of D minor, much of it is in the key of F major actually. In fact, measures 9 to the end of the region cut, all of that is in the key of F major. So review your F major scale so that you can play it all the way up to high D and back down to the starting F. Now let's look at rhythms and counting. To start off with, we're going to count the rhythms of this section without doing any tempo change. So I'll turn the metronome on. The first note, this pickup note, begins at the last quarter of count 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. Trill 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 6 and 1. Now you'll notice right away there's a couple of things that seem strange when we perform it with a metronome. The last note of this cut is going to be 2 full counts. And you'll notice I've written the syllable in the music to remind you it's not just ba-da, an unmeasured pickup note. It must be played like 1E and 2E and 3E and 1. So it has to be in time. Now we see stringendo, which is another fancy way to say accelerate. And then suddenly we just get the word tempo when it gets to forte. That's actually short for a tempo. It doesn't mean speed up or speed. I do have some students occasionally mean, wow, totally got near the end again and then misspoke. Of course, that's not all the story. There's the word stringendo there, which is a fancy way to say speed up. And then the word tempo, which is short for a tempo, change back to the original tempo. So we have an acceleration followed by an abrupt change to the original tempo. Now let's count that together. Ready? A 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. Trill 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 6 and 1. Notice the last note gets 2 counts. A number of my students try to do the stringendo too much. It doesn't have to be overdone. If it is overdone, then the a tempo sounds very, very odd. Practice it first with a metronome with no tempo change. Then turn the metronome off and do a little acceleration all the way up to the word tempo. Now let's take a look at learning some of the basic technique in this short concluding section. As I just mentioned, the first step is to practice with the metronome these measures without doing acceleration. Then turn the metronome off. Add the acceleration, but don't add trill. Don't add grace notes. Add the grace notes and trill only when you've completely become comfortable with the tempo requirements. So, here's a short version of these steps. Let's take a look now at how we're going to perform the note F in this composition and where there needs to be any changes. If you look at the music, there's an F major arpeggio at the word tempo. Only the low F needs to be left F. If you don't have a left F key, forked F will do, but I urge you to use the E flat key as well so that the tuning of forked F is better. We try to avoid playing forked F without the E flat key except for extremely fast passages. The other Fs should be played regular F. Unlike some of the other sections in this etude, there are no staccato marks of any kind. Everything here should be performed legato, especially the pickup note at the beginning. I hear a lot of students at all region perform those 2 notes like this. Yeah, there's no staccato marking, and it would not be stylistically correct anyway. Start by playing just a legato light tongue. There we go. Very little tongue sound all throughout this concluding section. Now let's look at some ways to build better tone quality and intonation in this concluding section. First, start by playing long tones on low F. Compare it to the octave above it. The F scale up to D. And compare that to the octave above it. Compare the Ds themselves, half whole D with the high one. And it's okay to use a tuner to play a reference pitch and compare those octaves. So let's see if we can get one going here. Great, there's a D. Most oboe players will play high D sharp. So take a little less reed in the mouth, open the throat and the oral cavity up a little bit. Do journal your progress. Keep your daily practice regimen and the results of your practice in a book so that you can use it for reference when your private teacher or your band director or friends ask, how is your progress on the all-region etude? Practice every day with a metronome and a tuner nearby. Use that metronome. That will keep your speed controlled when you play your audition. If I can be of service to you, please contact me at the email or phone number that's at the end of this video. Good luck in learning the all-region etudes for this year.